Hello and welcome to the 6th episode in our series on satire for the London Review of Books. I'm Clare Bucknell and I'm a Fellow of All Souls, Oxford, and as ever I'm joined by Colin Burrow, also a Fellow of All Souls. Hi Colin.
Hello Claire.
Gosh. Today we're talking about a poet whom we last met in our John Donne episode.
Those were happy days, I remember.
Yeah, they were. So Alexander Pope, poet, satirist, friend of John Gay and Jonathan Swift, maker of grottos, dog owner.
Yeah, beautiful Great Dane called Bounce. And remind us what he did to Donne or with Donne. I mean, Pope, not Bounce, because Bounce would have just drooled on Donne, I guess.
Yeah, we don't know that. So Pope, he rewrote two of Donne's sort of muckier satires, making them a bit more polite and less gross for 18th century readers.
And I suppose that's the kind of thing many people would expect of Pope and of early Georgian writing generally.
Yeah, so learning, civility, polish, refinement, rationality.
So it's just your period, isn't it, really, Claire? You can see why I prefer Elizabethan ruggedness and filth.
Yeah, so Pope is known for writing these elegant, neoclassical poems in neat rhyming couplets, not wild, thorny satires like Donne's or Rochester's.
So let me guess, our quantum of rude words this time is going to drop off from its previous glorious highs.
Spectacular highs. Pope's often thought of as, this polite, moderate, self-controlled writer. His most famous satire, The Rape of the Lock, was written to laugh two warring families together again, not to make enemies of them. But that's not the side of him that we're going to talk about today. We're going to follow the filth and the nastiness, as we always do, and we're going to talk about the Dunciad of 1743.
So what is the Dunciad, Claire?
Well, Colin, it is Pope's longest and most complex original poem, and he worked on it from the 1720s to shortly before his death in 1744. And it grew in size from 3 to 4 books, and it was a mock epic.
Now, the traditional view of the mock epic is that it takes all the grand conventions of a classical epic, sticks squitty little figures from modernity into that framework, and then shows everyone how terrible the present is in comparison with the epic past. Is that what Pope was doing?
Yeah, though I think the mockery flows in both directions. So it flows, both towards the objects of the satire.
So you mean the modern unheroic squitty people in it?
Exactly, but it also flows towards the medium.
So it satirises the sonorous and perhaps sort of overblown and antiquated conventions of an epic poem. So in mock epic, we've got a recipe for a kind of satire that goes at once for people in the present and for the conventions of the past. So it's a satire of content. Here's some idiots to look at, but also of form. Here are some creaky conventions that don't really work anymore. And as a result, because it's working in both directions like that, you might feel the ground constantly shifting under your feet. And that's sort of why we love satire, isn't it, really? It's that sense of not knowing where you stand or what the stable point is that you're resting your feet on. So the epic things that happen in the Dunciad are what exactly?
Well, epics tend to be about empires and their origins and about lineages and the dynasties who rule them.
And heroes and heroic deeds.
Exactly. So the Dunciad is about the founding of an empire and a poetic lineage. So the empire is that of the goddess Dullness, more on her later, and the lineage is a lineage of really bad poets.
And we're talking very bad poets, aren't we?
We're going to hear some of that verse later, if you want proof.
Yeah.
So in book 1, the hero, who was a real writer whom Pope knew, called Colley Cibber, also more on him later, he's selected by Dullness to be king of all the dunces. And then Cibber proceeds to do not much at all, except fall heroically asleep at the end of book 2.
Right. So in Virgil's Aeneid in particular, you've also got things like heroic games and visions of the dynastic future of the Roman nation and its emperors.
Yeah, well, the Dunciad has those too. So in its book 2, it has heroic games in which poets and publishers try to, excel each other.
In heroic deeds. Like
pissing into the air,
okay.
Or, tickling patrons with feathers or diving into a grotty open sewer. So yeah, very similar. And then book 3, more or less the whole of that, it's a heroic dream vision in which Cibber dreams he's down in the underworld, like Aeneas in Virgil's Aeneid, and he's being shown the past and future of Dullness by another very bad dead poet called Elkanah Settle.
It's a good name.
Such a good name. He was real. And then the last and fourth book is a kind of catalogue of different kinds of modern idiocy, as Pope saw it, from butterfly collecting through to theology.
Marvellous. So I can see how all of those not very heroic things are simultaneously reflecting on Pope's present and on epic conventions. I mean, it makes epic and heroic actions, well, it makes you see them from a different angle, doesn't it? When you've got people competing over pissing into the air. But the Dunciad is actually quite an unusual satire, isn't it? Because a lot of the works we've talked about so far are deliberately general and indirect in nature. That is, they don't set out to attack real and particular people by name, or at least not explicitly. They attack abstract vices and follies, or they say they're doing that. But the Dunciad names names and it settles personal scores, doesn't it?
Yeah. So it's this virtuoso bit of mock heroic, but it's also a very nasty, very personal roll call of all the writers that Pope thought were bad. So they're the dunces of its title.
So it's Dunciad, like the Iliad about Ilium or Troy. And it wasn't just that Pope thought these writers were bad at their craft. He also actually hated them, didn't he?
Yes, really, really charitable, yeah.
Okay. So we think it's a great poem and we will explain why. But not everyone has loved the Dunciad, have they? I mean, and it's worth being honest about this because I think of all the satires we're going to give the close reading treatment to, it is the hardest. And it's also perhaps the hardest to like.
I think that's fair. I mean, certainly people have hated it in the past. So the Victorians really didn't get it. Leslie Stephen, Virginia Woolf's father, said that it showed Pope to be a cruel little persecutor, dishing out coarse abuse. And then a bit later, Lytton Strachey compares it to spoonfuls of boiling oil ladled out by a fiendish monkey at an upstairs window. And
the fiendish monkey is a bit of a low blow, isn't it? And it comes from the fact that Pope's enemies, contemporary enemies, called him A P-E, that's to say ape. And, picking that up seems to be particularly cruel on Strachey's part.
Agreed, yeah. So, yeah, as you said, while Pope was alive, he was subject to these endless ad hominem attacks. And one we might mention dates from 1728, so just after the first version of the Dunciad was published. And it compares him to this sort of malevolent squatting toad who spits his venom through the town. And his author was one Edmund Curll spelt with 2 L's, which to me makes him sound so much more villainous than if he just had 1 L. Exactly. And Curll was his pirate publisher and Pope's mortal enemy, and we'll be meeting him a few times in this episode.
But he didn't just compare Pope to a toad, did he?
No.
No, he said he attacked everyone. For not content with friends alone, he, Pope, spits his venom through the town. The stinking venom flows around, and nauseous slaver hides the ground. Yet not one mortal whom it hit, 'twas just as harmless as his wit. For take away the filthy part of turd and spew and mud and fart, words which no gentleman could use, and e'en a nightman would refuse, there naught remained.
In other words, the Dunciad was a giant pile of shit. Take away the shit and nothing of substance remained.
So, I mean, why did Pope's satire get to people in this way?
You can say. Partly because of his risky methods. So where other satirists kind of coyly teased identities by covering up with asterisks or dashes, Pope named names, or he created personas that were thin enough to be seen through. And he pissed off critics who liked to defend satire as this noble moral art, because, you couldn't possibly read the Dunciad and believe that.
Because it often looks really like a direct and personal libel almost.
Exactly. And by the same token, he irritates other neoclassicists, some of whom feel that he's sort of tarring with his own filthy brush, the ancient writers he imitated. So he was viewed as this super talented versifier who got carried away by private resentments and grudges.
And I suppose the fact that the first version of the Dunciad appeared in 1728 and the last version was printed in 1743 also tells us something, doesn't it? Because it's a poem that Pope took really seriously, almost to the point of obsession, and it was also something like a lifetime's work. It was 15 years of burning hatred.
Yep. And it attacks more or less everything. The book trade, opera, the grand tour, radical theologians, the government, the king, as well as all those sort of scuzzier kinds of poets and publishers. Nothing and no one is safe.
And that's part of what makes it hard to read, I think, because there's a lot of stuff in it, a lot of names in it, a lot of people in it, and you might, while you're reading it, feel guilty that you don't know who all of them are. And the 1743 edition compounds the problem, doesn't it, by adding endless parodic footnotes and spoof prefaces and advertisements and so on. And that creates a really dense and rich stew for most modern appetites. We should ask ourselves, why have we inflicted all this difficulty on ourselves and on our listeners, Claire?
I have wondered that, I must say, in the last week. But the answer is because we're brave and we're learned.
We are.
And it is an amazing poem, and also we know all the answers.
Well, of course, yes, we do. Yeah.
Say it with conviction.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
What I think we're going to try and say today, which seems nuts, is that the Dunciad is as easy as A, B, C, because to understand it, you only really need to grasp a couple of things about the plot and to know a bit about 3 or maybe 4 people. And all the rest of the Duncey characters are more or less self-explanatory.
They're idiots.
They're all like varieties of idiot. And then you can sit back and enjoy the jokes, which are great.
So you're offering to provide this ABC of dullness. Okay, so what's the first of the 3 or 4 characters in the Dunciad that will make the poem as easy as ABC?
First one, Alexander Pope.
No, it's cheating to begin with the first name and the surname. All right, I keep going. I trust you. Tell us about Pope. Why did he become a satirist?
Well, the thing we should maybe start with saying, especially in the context of the Dunciad, is that Pope was someone who wanted to be seen as a classic, timeless author. He wanted to write long poems about the glories of his nation, all his glorious patrons, and probably in the ideal world, according to Alexander Pope, he would have been poet laureate. But he wasn't.
So it helps to think of him as someone who sort of wanted to be Virgil and live in a great age of Augustan classicism, but who was stuck in a pestilential modernity.
Yeah.
And that's how he knew about all those conventions from classical epic and knew them intimately enough to send them up. Because I suppose in another world, he'd have wanted to use them in earnest and be an epic poet.
Exactly, but that's the point, in another world. Yeah. In the real world Pope lived in, several big pieces of the jigsaw were missing.
Thanks for listening to this extract from On Satire, a close reading series from the London Review of Books. To listen to the full episode and all our other close reading series, sign up to our close reading subscription at lrb.me/close readings or click on the link in the description.